If you've been using the term community-led growth like it's settled wisdom, my next guest may change your mind about that. Joshua Zerkel built community programs at Evernote and Asana and just wrote The Community Code, his complete framework for building community that actually drives business outcomes. His central argument, led is exactly the wrong word. That's where we're starting. Kalisa, roll the opening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You've tuned into Talk About Your Community. I'm Todd Nilson with Clocktower Advisors. And on this show, we bring in a variety of guests with perspectives, ideas, and inspiration for you about building better communities online, offline, or that little hybrid area in between. Today is no exception. I am super excited. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, to having my guest on the show, Mr. Joshua Zerkel. Josh is, for the last 20 years, he's been building and scaling community programs at some of the most recognizable names in B2B software, including Evernote, Asana, and HeyGen. And in Asana, he ran a global program that grew to over 200 events a year and influenced nearly $100 million in pipeline. And he's currently the head of go-to-market at Gradual, and another fantastic community platform program lead. And that particular platform is a partner of Clocktower Advisors as well. So what I want to dig into with Josh today is his growth framework at the center of his new book, The Community Code. So please join me in welcoming, boy, I can't talk today. Please join me in welcoming Josh Zerkel to the show. Josh, welcome. Good to see you. Glad you're here because I can't say anything more.
Hey, Todd. Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Josh, first of all, congratulations on the publication of your new book. This is Author Month, apparently, for the community profession. So I've got coming up on the show in 2 weeks, Chris Catania's book. Chris is going to be coming on and talking about the Community First Advantage. Your books came out sort of at the same time. And before we jumped on the show, you said, "Hey, these are kind of like nice compliments to each other in the scheme of things." Although it was not planned, that's just the way it turned out to be.
Yeah, I think Chris is awesome, and his book is equally great. I encourage people to frankly read both of our books. They cover some similar ground, but from very different perspectives. And I think both are actually quite valuable in getting a complete picture of like how and why to build community within a business today.
Well, I'm honored that I get a chance to speak to both of you pretty early in the release of the books. I know you were on an earlier show with the estimable Yuri Lazaruk, and if those of you who are tuned in today to the live stream haven't checked out his show, Communiverse, it's fantastic. He's a wonderful interviewer and had a wonderful in-depth conversation with Josh. We're going to cover slightly different things today, particularly digging into the growth framework. But before we get into all of that, I just wanted to say to everybody who's tuned into the live show, we do look for your questions and ideas and reactions to things that are said on the show. And so if there's something in the comments that kind of stands out, either Kalisa or myself will promote it into the chat so Josh and I can respond to anything that's there. And seeing some familiar faces out there, Catherine, Tracy, Ambra, Priscilla. Great to see you guys. Welcome to the show. Glad you're able to tune in. Please do not be shy in the comments, sharing your ideas. So Josh, we have just an hour to dig in here, and I feel like I've got this all-you-can-eat buffet of topics we could go into. But why don't we start a little bit with your origin story? Because one of the things that stood out to me is I was wondering if the community profession just lucked out that we got a certified productivity organizer who is now come into our profession and been working. So like I know there's a lot of great actionable, useful templates and suggestions in your book. Did that come out of your earlier work and your certification as a CPO?
Yeah, I mean, I now inflict my organizational expertise on community builders around the world. Basically, my origin story. So I've had many careers over the course of my life, and I encourage most people to do the same because that's how you get to do a lot of interesting things. One of the roles that I had was doing productivity consulting, and one of my first forays into the experience of community was as part of the professional association for organizers and productivity consultants many years ago. And when I first found that group, that was my first real experience of like, oh, I'm part of something bigger. And when we come together, we can learn from one another, we can share ideas, we can help one another, we can be better together. And eventually I became president of our professional association. I got really involved and really started digging in. And after really experiencing what it's like to lead something like that, I started to understand the shape of how these things work, the mechanics behind the scenes of how to motivate people, how to keep them engaged, why you'd want to do this in the first place, how to measure what's happening. And that really led me down the path towards truly building community as a thing that I do all day, every day. As an outcome of that work doing productivity consulting and organizational work, I ended up leveraging Evernote, which at the time was like the hottest tool in Silicon Valley. And because I'm based in San Francisco, they were based in Redwood City, just down the peninsula. I ended up getting to know the people at the company really well. And I ended up writing 2 books about using Evernote. And eventually I started forming my own communities around using this tool. And eventually the team at Evernote said, why don't you come do that for us? And
Nice.
that led me to leading the Evernote community, which then led to all the other things that I've built during my career as a person doing community professionally.
I loved Evernote for years and years. Like I had a huge knowledge base on that piece of software. I've only fairly recently migrated away from it onto. I think I'm on Obsidian now. I think that's where I'm putting a lot of my effort. But it's a great product, great piece of software. I think I just sort of outgrew it, for my part. But certainly like when you were running things, man, that was a great platform.
It was amazing, and I have nothing but good things to say about my experience there. Like, I built a fantastic, along with the team, of course, a fantastic, truly global community. Our customer base was 200 million people globally at the time. And so the size of our community, the activities that we were able to do, the connections we were able to build were frankly just incredible. And I had some very formative early experiences there on how to shape community programs for B2C and B2B, and how to make sure that people are getting what they need so they can be successful and in turn have the company be successful as a result.
Well, cool. So I'm sure we'll be coming back to some of those formative experiences. I know you spent a lot of time in the book talking about the work you did at Asana as well. And there's a few other really interesting case studies that you bring up, during the course of the book. CBS News. I don't know if I'm going to say it right. NAPO,
NAPO,
NAPO.
that was the professional association for productivity professionals and organizers.
Yeah, and then HeyGen as well. And now you've landed at Gradual. What attracted you to hitching your wagon to that particular star?
Yeah, so as we've talked about, I've spent a lot of my career in the world of building communities. And of course, when you build communities, you end up using a variety of different tools and platforms. And when I was at HeyGen, I'd moved from Asana, which was a much larger organization, to HeyGen, which was much smaller. I wanted to completely rethink the tech stack, but I still wanted to make sure that community members had a variety of different ways that they could interact and have different experiences. And that led me to Gradual, which is a community platform and customer engagement platform that lets you create a variety of different ways for people to have the community experience. And I like the product so much that I came to work here to build our go-to-market motion and all of our marketing and our own community program. And so it's the first time for me being at a vendor. Usually I'm in the purchasing decision area, but it's really interesting being on the other side and being able to help our customers build their own communities. So I get a very interesting bird's eye view of what's happening in the world of community and what's happening across different companies as a result of my work here at Gradual.
Is that what led you to be inspired to write the book?
Um, it helped, but I've actually kind of had this book on the back burner for the past several years. And I had been encouraged by a number of people in my orbit that, I have a perspective, I should say something. And for a long time, I was like, I don't want to be the guy that writes the book about this. But eventually I had some time and I thought, if I'm not going to do it now, I'm never going to do it. And as it turns out, when I was writing it, I had a lot to say. And so it really helped me codify some of the ways that I think about community, especially when it comes to having it be an actual business growth lever. There are plenty of perspectives and books already in existence about how to build a great community. I didn't want to replicate that because I don't have much beyond what's already been stated to say about like the mechanics of building. But I think where a lot of community leaders get it wrong is in the business part of running a community. If you're running a community under the auspices of a company, that means you're getting paid by a company to build a community program. There are a lot of things that you need to think about that I think don't come naturally to most community builders, about how to make sure that you're not creating value just for members, but also for the business, how you're communicating the value, how you're attaching the value of community to what other stakeholders within your business care about, and how you're aligning the work that you're doing with the rest of the teams within an organization. Because this is where I've seen so many community builders just frankly go off the rails, and they end up having what I often see, which is the community as an island, where it's this own thing that lives in its own world. And sometimes it connects to the business, but most of the time it doesn't. And that is a very, very dangerous place for community to live.
So I know we were talking about Chris's book that just came out, but I think one of the things that came to mind as I was going through yours is it made me think back to another, I think, very business-focused case for community, which was a book by Derek Weeks called Unfair Mindshare. He was a guest on the show. It's in the back catalog. Maybe Kalisa will drop a link into this when she does the post-production edit. But his was from the perspective, like, I mean, he comes from the DevRel world, and his perspective was as a CMO, thinking about like, hey, community's under your umbrella. Here's how here's how you budget for it. Here's how you talk about it. Here's the value of it as it's communicated to executive leadership and across the company. And I know you spend a lot of time talking about sort of like where community is placed in the book, and you've got some thinking about that. And I think you talk about that a lot on the show with Yuri. So I don't want to tread over that ground, too much, but if you would maybe just sort of briefly, describe, the idea about where I think you talk about it, maybe being a role that reports to the COO of the organization.
Yeah. I have a perspective on this for sure. I feel like in the world of community, we've relied a lot on inertia as to where community should sit. And so oftentimes, because of the nature of where community came from, in many organizations, sometimes it still sits under support or under CX. Sometimes it sits under marketing if it's looked at as more of an awareness function. Once in a while, it sits under sales if it's looked at as a revenue producer. And sometimes it's under product if it's looked at as mostly a tool for producing customer feedback and input. None of these are wrong, but none of them are right. The reason why is because community is one of the few functions within an organization that is truly horizontal. In this case, meaning it sees the customer across the entirety of their journey, whether it's at the beginning from awareness all the way through to initial engagement and consideration, through conversion, all the way through to depth of usage and retention, and then ideally towards advocacy. Each of these within an existing organization is typically owned by a different team. And community, because it sits in one team, is often anchored to one part of this life cycle journey. And I don't think that's the right way to think about it, because community is this truly horizontal thing. It's rare. And there's only typically one function that's responsible for looking across the entirety of the go-to-market motion, and that's usually the COO or head of business. And when you sit community there, my theory is that if a head of business sees like the business needs focus in this one area, they can redirect the focus of community to focus on what the business actually needs at any given time. If you're sitting within marketing as a community function, at the end of the day, marketing is who's paying your bills. And so even though where the business really needs community focus is on retention, marketing's job is not retention. And so you will be focused on the things that marketing needs. Your budget is coming from marketing. And so your goals probably ladder up to marketing. Even though the business really needs retention right now, that's just not where you sit. And so I've seen this happen time and again in my career and in those that I've advised, where they know that community needs to make an impact over in this other part of the business, but they're often hamstrung by where they sit. And it's not because the intention isn't there. It's just that's the nature of these vertically oriented organizations within a company.
I think it's a very strong argument, and I wanted to say it comes back to I think you term it this way. I know I've seen it. It might have been one of your LinkedIn posts that I saw on. You talk about community as an operating system that sort of layers across this cross-functional purpose it serves. But I like so much that idea of the COO being the one who can marshal resources in the right direction at the right time. It's a more adaptive way to deploy the community function thoughtfully and intentionally across the needs of the business at a given time.
That's it exactly. It's really about understanding what the business needs at any given moment and having someone who says, okay, I see what the business wants and what it needs. I understand what this function does and what it can do. And here's where it can make the best impact right now. And that's not saying change what it does every 6 months, but it's saying like, let's make sure we're pointing this army of people that are part of the external force for our business, this community, in the direction where they can make the biggest impact. And if you're sitting within one function, you just can't do it the same way.
Right. So I got to ask the question. So you're make a great case that this is something who's the head of business or the COO should be having the community team as direct report, in the organization. How many COOs are actually aware of that and would want the community team? Like, have you run into many that seem to be aware of like why this would maybe be a matchup, and how do I make a case for that if I'm in an organization, right?
Yeah, I've had conversations with COOs who are becoming increasingly aware. COOs often have multiple functions reporting to them that are kind of horizontal in this way. Oftentimes things like strategy report to them. So they have already this notion of there's this team that sits not above, but across all of these different parts of the org. This is similar in the same way that one of these teams has this wide purview. And this isn't, again, jockeying for position. It's just this does a different thing than these other more verticalized organizations within a company do. And so I have had conversations with CEOs that are like, oh, this is interesting. I need to think about it. I don't know that I've seen any that have done this yet. Again, this is my hypothesis, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try it. Just because it hasn't been done doesn't mean that we can't do it. I mean, frankly, we've made up our org structures. We can remake them in other ways. And I think community is in an interesting spot. A decade ago, 15 years ago, customer success was this new function where companies were wondering, what is this thing that sits between support and sales? Why do we need this? We already have these two other functions. Now, if you go to any company that offers any sort of subscription-based service, especially for B2B, every company has customer success. It's not a question. It's just an expected thing. And I think for community, it's going to be similar. We have a few hurdles that we need to get over. One is where it should sit and what it should do. The other is that every company defines community a little bit differently. And we as community builders have often done ourselves a disservice because we have been loath to define what community is and how it should be measured and what it should drive. And oftentimes we want to have it do all of the things, which also doesn't help. And so there's some growing up that we need to do. But I think in the future, companies will have community. It will be an expected function, and it will have definitions around what it does and where it should sit. And I don't think having it sit within the existing structures of our orgs is going to be the answer.
I mean, everything in my instincts as a strategist is like you want to maximize your agility and your resilience as you're enabling a community program. And like having it reporting up to that executive influence role of the COO who has that ability to turn the business as needed to be successful. That's the best case that I've heard of, for anybody there. And so I think if there's anything that I was going to take as an activist, kind of approach, to working with organizations and especially as I've been lucky enough over the years to be able to come into organizations that are thinking about starting a community program, helping to advise them about where to put it in the organizational structure. this is tremendously helpful, and the book can then be used to make a case for that, because you go into great detail in the argument.
The secret of this book is that it's actually, although it's beneficial for community builders, my real hope is that this will go into the hands of leadership, because it's really targeted towards their perspective of how should we think about this? Why might we want this? Where should it sit? How should we resource it? The arguments, the conversations that most community builders should be having with leaders, but typically aren't well equipped to, I've tried to make those arguments directly in this book.
And I think you do, and I think like that's why I group it with Derek Weeks's Unfair Mindshare, because it's trying to do the same kind of thing. It's speaking to that executive leader in their language about the value, of doing the work. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of great comments dropped through in the chat here. One, Patrick says, super relevant. 3 proposals in the queue that want go-to-market motions in their community. So yeah, this is timely, man, very much.
I'm glad, super glad.
So that one as well. Amber feels you're speaking to her soul. That's wonderful. And Tracy, community as an operating system, love that. Yeah, I think the mental models we use to describe what we do are so important. And I know before the show we were talking about sort of like some of the terminology that comes up in regards to community, and I think we had kind of come to the point that characterizing some of the words we've used, like community-led and community everywhere, as being sort of, this is like our adolescence. We're trying on different ways of talking about ourselves to see if it resonates with each other and with the executive leadership teams that are trying to support us, trying to understand, what we do.
Yeah, I mean, by trade, I'm a marketer. I think about words and how we present and what we say, and these things all matter. And I mean, I like many of us in the community profession, was really excited by the framing community-led growth when it first started coming around. Just like I was excited by the idea of, which I think is now quaint, chief community officer, when that first started coming out a few years ago. Like I think all of these things, community-led, chief community officer, these are all requests of, look at me, see me, I'm here for our profession. They're begs for relevance, essentially. And it's not that we aren't relevant. I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't think that we are. I don't think any of this framing was correct. Because functionally, I would love someone to point me to an organization that is truly community-led. Led means you are in the pole position, you're in the driver's seat of the entirety of that go-to-market motion. I haven't seen that. There are definitely organizations where community is certainly important to their motion, but at the end of the day, I don't think what community builders, leaders, our folks are asking for, or we're asking for, is to lead the organization or to lead go-to-market. I think what we're asking for is a seat at the table and to be on equal footing with the other parts of the motion and be looked at as an integral part of the entirety of the motion because of that horizontal nature of the way that community functions. And so the led framing, I think, was interesting in that it helped put us on the map. It did a lot of other things that I don't think we had anticipated. When you say that you're leading, and especially leading growth, those come with a lot of expectations. Growth is an entire function that exists within most organizations already. And so when you say you're leading growth, then you need to be ready to really show very clear through line between what you're doing and revenue, because growth is typically defined as revenue. And most community builders simply can't do that, either because community isn't actually designed to directly drive revenue, or because the data and the metrics aren't there, or the reporting isn't available. And so when we created this framing of community-led, it probably felt good for most of us. It felt good to me. But once we start unpacking what that actually means, what community-led growth especially means, I don't know that we delivered on that. And I certainly think we weren't expected or given the resources to deliver it on it the way that we thought we might. And I don't know that most organizations were looking to us to do that either, but we kind of shot ourselves in the foot a little bit with that framing. And so one of the byproducts of that is that I think because we can't deliver truly on community-led growth, I think organizations are now questioning its value in a way that they hadn't previously. And
Mhm.
so I think this is where we really need to retrench a bit as a profession and figure out what it is that we're actually there to do. And this, of course, does vary organization by organization, but it's up to us to start putting some parameters on the boundaries of what community can be, what it can achieve, the ways it does it, and how we measure it.
I love that. On reflection of the whole talking about this or characterizing this as our adolescence, I think community led and think and some of the other terminology that we brought up, I almost think of it as it was almost a rallying cry for the
Mhm.
profession, and it was the equivalent of the teenagers saying like, "But you guys just don't get us. We're special and we're better." Like, yeah, we needed to say that, but now I think you're right. Like, we need to get to a more productive conversation. We need to enter our adulthood and start having those integrated conversations. I really love that. Um,
Yeah. I wish that on the one hand, I loved the framing so much community led because it I feel like it really like put us on the map. It was that rallying cry, like we can do this. It wasn't necessary in that way. I think we needed a moment, and I think we need to reframe how we think about this moving forward. That's in a way that's just more accurate to what we do.
yeah. So I'm gonna turn the question back on you, and then I want to spend some time digging into the growth framework because I think that's at the core of the book. It's a process that I think is repeatable and very useful, practical, knowledge from somebody who was in the trenches and did this at some pretty large organizations. Boy, gosh, what was the question I was just going to ask? The question I was going to ask is, well, okay, to turn the question back on you that I think you were asking earlier is like, why does community matter to organizations, and maybe who should build one?
Let's start with who should build one. I think organizations that are well poised to build one are ones where you have ideally, well, I'm talking about this in like a more product oriented sense, but like product market fit, meaning you offer something that people actually like and care about. I've had conversations with founders who don't have a product yet and they want me to build a community for them. It can be done, but the question is like, why? Like, just wait till you have something, and then once you have something and people are excited about it, then you have the building blocks for building your community. So I think if we're thinking about who should build one, you have some product market fit, you found some people that are excited about what you do, but beyond that, you have a purpose. Like, what do you want community to do for your organization? I think that's a question you need to answer first. You can always figure out how to make it valuable for participants, but if you're not clear on what its purpose is, what job it's there to do, then the community itself, the team running it, and the business around it are probably going to struggle along the way. And so I think that's a better set of questions to ask if it's like who should have one. Um, and I think when we're talking about building community, I think the other thing to think about, and this is kind of a bitter pill for most businesses to swallow, especially right now, is that it takes time. This is not the send it out as an email or make a social post and immediately see results type of motion. This is really where you invest, you spend time building, you build relationships with people over time who are part of the community, you show them value, and then in turn that creates value for the business. None of that can be created overnight.
It doesn't turn on like a light switch. I mean, we're talking about building trust and friendships with your customer base or your whatever your stakeholder is you're building the community for. Yeah, 100%, Matt. Yeah,
Yeah, the way that I frame it is, this is not reality TV where you meet someone and get married right away. This is more like building relationships. If you've ever met another human, typically you don't walk up to them and say like, "Hey, let's get married." Typically you say like, "Hey, what's your name? Tell me about you. Oh, here's a bit about me." And it's the same in community. We're just doing relationships at scale. And so it still takes that level of showing value, exchanging value, giving people a reason to come back, making sure that people are enjoying themselves. So this is one thing I want to be careful how I frame. Fun is not a business outcome. Enjoyment is what the experience should be for your members. But saying that people are having fun in the community is not something that you typically want to report out. as part of your results when you are talking to leaders within your organization. This is a really hard spot for community builders because the experience of community, of being a member, of being part of the program, ideally it should be enjoyable. Typically, if you are especially building a community for a business of any type, B2B or B2C, you are asking people to spend their time in your community. You better make sure it's enjoyable and valuable, otherwise they're not coming back. But
Yeah.
that enjoyment in and of itself is not something that your business probably cares about. And so you have to make sure that you're framing, for members, you're creating an enjoyable experience. For the business, that enjoyable experience becomes real value for the business.
It's tremendously hard to get out of that frame, I think. Like I feel great empathy for community managers that want to communicate the excitement and fun of being in their community, because that requires genuine emotional labor to build that sense of belonging and connection, and what could be easily dismissed as sort of the kumbaya vibe, of the space. But that's super important. It's just that the executive leadership team's saying, like, well, okay, what's that getting me at the end of the day? Like,
That's right.
That's lovely. I love that. But, we got a PR team that's supposed to do that kind of stuff too. Right?
Yeah. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book is I frame it as program health. Like, are people enjoying themselves? Are they doing the community thing? Are they taking advantage of all the different ways that you've built out the program versus business impact? The business impact is why the PR team should care, or why the sales team should care, or why the COO would take notice of what's happening in the community. One of the dangers of building community, especially at a larger organization, is many of the things that we do in community are very public. Like, it's designed for people to see it and experience it. And one of the things that we often do are events. Events usually come with people there. And when there are people there, we sometimes take pictures. And usually the pictures are people smiling and having a good time. And those are the types of things that are easy for us to share internally and externally, which is great. The danger is that people inside of our organization, decision makers, peers, stakeholders, may only see the fun part of community, and they don't understand all the work that goes into making that fun happen and the results that fun then creates for the company. Just a short anecdote. I've hosted many events over the course of my career, and any of you who've done events, you know how much work goes in behind the scenes. If you ever attend an event and things look like they're going smoothly, it's because someone behind the scenes worked their butt off to make that happen. And I hosted an event, and I brought along a peer, a stakeholder from another part of the organization, and all the work had already been done beforehand. All they were doing at that event was sitting next to me at the check-in desk and literally giving people their name tag. And this person said, "Oh my God, your job is so easy. All you do is sit here and just greet people." And a part of me died inside that day. And so this is where if you are doing this kind of work, it's really important that people don't just see the easy part, that the experience is easy for people who attend, but that you are explaining internally that real value is being created. You're not just throwing parties. You're creating something that is meaningful for members that then in turn creates value for the business.
Man, that just drove a stake through my heart. You just drove a stake through my heart, man. Because so I came from another profession that was very much dismissed in that way too, which was recruiting, where you were viewed as just somebody that slings resumes, all day. That's all you do, and that's easy. Anybody can do that. Why are we paying you to do that work? Same thing in the community world. We can make it look easy. There's an Italian Renaissance concept called sprezzatura. And sprezzatura was the idea of making things look easy in practice. It was like one of the great things of a courtier, was especially effective. Sprezzatura is sort of like very, very easy. It's very James Bond, but that's a danger in making things look too easy, because then it can get dismissed.
Oh yeah. And for us, if we do our jobs well, the whole thing looks easy for participants. So it is tricky. That's why we need to be really, really good about how we communicate the value of what we do. Really good.
So making this valuable. I want to land the plane here on this on the growth framework, because this was so core to your book. I'm going to go through the parts here, and then we can maybe kind of break them down little by little. But growth is an acronym. And it stands for generate insights, ready and refine, open to customers, work the data, love that, and then tweak and adapt, and finally harness momentum. And you spend a lot of time in each of these, and there's a good breakdown in the book, for it. Again, another plug. People just got to pick up the book and use it. There are other books that kind of walk through the process of setting up a community. Adrian Spear's The Accidental Community Manager has a nice approach to it as well. But I think there's a thoroughness with which you're going through this, and I think an emphasis that I saw on making sure internal communications and executive stakeholder buy-in is such an essential part of that work. That for me, that was one of the pieces that kind of stood out, with the growth framework. But I don't know, you want to say a little bit about how you came to this particular framework approach?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I appreciate that. Every book has its framework. Every expert has their structure. Yeah. I'm no different. But when I approached looking at my work across the span of my career and all the customers I've advised, I started seeing some common patterns for what worked really well. And oftentimes that starts with understanding, and that's why Generate Insights is the first step in that process. It's really about not just understanding what customers want. I think that's often where we start, but I think the real place to start is, what does the business want from this community? And what are we trying to build? Why do I have a job here? What is it that the business brought me in to do? And starting with that, and then the goals that you have for your program, to then generate the insights that you need to create the program that will map to that. And so that's really the place that I think is important to begin. And then from there, that's where you go into R, which is ready and refine. And that's where you clarify, here's what the program elements will be. Here's what the ownership of each of the different parts of the community world will look like. Here's the partners internally that I'm going to sign up to build my coalition of the willing to help me with this program and build this together cross-functionally. And from there, that's where you really think about, okay, I'm ready to actually create this program, launching with a pilot and opening the doors to the customers and getting them to get enrolled into this program and see the initial value, and getting people to participate. To me, that's often where we get most excited, but that's the third step in the process, in my opinion, is you don't just want to launch, you want to get the information you need and prep everything so that there's a smooth experience, and then you open the doors to people. And then from there, that's where you start understanding what's happening with the data and adapting it over time, so that you have a mechanism by which you can always be ready to answer the question, what is the value of community? Whenever anyone asks, and someone will. And so that you are ready for that conversation anytime you need to have it. And from there, you continue to adjust the program over time and leverage the community program across different parts of the organization. It's really about understanding stakeholder needs, what their programs are, what their goals are, and how you can attach community directly into those workflows.
And that involves doing some deeper annual surveys, quarterly check-ins, things like that. Even those internal road shows about this is our next initiative. This is the next thing we're thinking about doing. This is how we think it serves you. Does that fit with what you're thinking?
Yeah, this is the perpetual job of community, at least for the foreseeable future. Is we're in this interesting spot. We sit within a company, but we serve our customers who are external, and we serve our customers who are internal. And because of that, we need to continually keep the conversation going between not just our community members, which is, I think, where a lot of community builders hyper-focus, but equally important, if not maybe more so, is what is the business asking for? What do my internal stakeholders want? What's happening in their programs? Where do I see gaps where community can be directly connected to these workflows that already exist, so that we're creating more value together? One of the things that I've seen a lot, which I think is the wrong way to approach things, is I think by the nature of who comes into the community profession, we're often helpers. We like connecting people. We want to create value. And so we often frame ourselves when we're talking with stakeholders as community can help you. We can help you achieve more. We can help support your program. I don't know that that's the right framing. I think that it's not, because most other parts of the organization are not going around doing roadshows saying like, how can I help you? It's
Right.
more, I think the perspective that we need to take is, I want to understand what's happening within other parts of the organization. I want to intimately understand their goals and what they're trying to achieve. I want to learn about their programs, and I want to look for places where, because I know how community works, where we can connect dots between what we're doing in the community and the goals and programs that these other teams have. So that rather than operating in parallel, we are actually connecting the dots between our various programs and doing things together, achieving goals together, rather than I'm just helping you achieve your goals.
Yes, yes. So I'll often phrase this as a very wise colleague of mine, Kurt Hallbeck, first made this comparison for me. He says, you need to be the medicine and not the vitamin
Yes,
in the
community
process.
is often the vitamin. We're like,
Yeah,
hey, we're great for you. If you use us, here's what can happen. That's nice. No one's going to say no, but no one's going to say, hell yeah, I need that. I want that. And that's where we want to get to. We want to get to the place where other teams are saying, like, my work won't function without having community be part of it. Here's directly how community is connected into these core workflows. Here's how it shows up in playbooks. Here's how is it expected to be used across the team. That is a very different bar than we can help you. That's where we need to get to.
I love that. I love that. So there was something in the framework that I think I struggled with personally. I've got a complex relationship with the terminology of pilot programs. And I think when you're using the word, I'm thinking about what you're referring as sort of like a side project. It's that sense where leadership isn't really committed to it, but they want to see some kind of proof before they really kind of
Mhm.
throw their resources into it. That's not exactly what you're talking about with the
That's not
pilot.
what I'm using the word a bit differently. Pilot is like, for me, when I'm talking about it in this context of community, this is before your public launch of your program. This is
Mhm.
when you have a small subset of people essentially kicking the tires for what you've built. You've already come in with your hypothesis of, we think the community needs this structure, this framing, these activities. Here's how we're going to measure it. Here's how we're going to track it. And here's how we're going to report on it. Now we need some people in it to populate it to see if it actually does those things and how well it lands. That initial group, that initial test is your pilot. After
Yeah.
you've launched publicly, after you've worked out the kinks of your program and then opened the doors to all of the people that you want to be part of your program, after that, I typically frame things as experiments. We're going to experiment with this add-on to the program. We're going to experiment with this other community initiative, which I think, Todd, is more of what you're referring to. We're going to test this out. We're going to see how it lands. And then if it works, great. If not, we're going to try something else.
I really like that. Very, very cool. So one of the other things that stood out to me about the framework that I'll point out was as you're talking about sort of working working with the data, it's something else that's come up for me a lot in my professional practice, which is making sure there's a big difference between tracking the community health data versus tracking the business impact data. Those are two different reporting tracks that come through. I know, like the ex-Googler Avinash Kalshik talks about the click stream data. These are likes and posts and replies and new membership joins. Those are great. They're the lifeblood of, is the community humming along? Are these things happening? But the executive leadership team has a hard time seeing how that relates to what they're trying to drive.
Yeah, they don't care. Why should they? That's not the
Right.
language that they speak. And so every function within a business has kind of their own internal language of their own program, how it's working. Because community is often sat in this place of being helpful and kind of off on the side, many of us have not graduated to the place where we can speak both the language of our program and the language of the business. And this is where it becomes really important to be able to speak both. You have to be able to say, here's how the program is working. Are members engaging? Are they taking advantage of this part of the program? Are people showing up at events or participating online? Like, what are they doing in the program? Because that tells you whether the things that you are building are landing with your intended audience. That doesn't say anything to your stakeholders, to your leaders, about why the community matters. why should they care about the level of your engagement in your program? Like, who cares? Like, I don't go into the world of content creation and say, like, how many eyeballs are on a given article in a month? Like, I don't care about that. That's for them to manage on their own. What I care about more is, like, how does that result in something tangible for the business? And not to put too fine a point on it, but the way that I often frame this is, in a business, you're typically there to do one of two things, which is either save the company money or make the company money. That's it. Very simple. And so we as community builders need to show how the things that are happening in our program connect to one or two of those things. Sometimes both, sometimes one or the other, but typically we need to show how community impacts revenue or adoption or retention or advocacy, each of which connects in one way or another to saving the company money or making the company money. And those are the things that leadership understands, that stakeholders understand. An easier way to look at this is every business, well, most, have goals that are stated. You as a community builder should be able to say, here's how what we're doing in the community ladders up to one of those goals. If you can't do that, you probably should. If you need to learn how, this is something that can be built and practiced. But being able to speak about what you're doing in the community and how it matters to those goals can only help you, because that's the language that the business is already speaking. And so being able to speak the same language as your peers across the company is one of the most beneficial things that you can do for your program, because then you can truly talk about why your work matters, not we have really high engagement. Nobody cares about your engagement.
Yeah, I love that perspective. So I was going to ask you, so in terms of real practical how-to knowledge, so you've landed in some large organizations and taken over their community programs, Evernote, Asana, HeyGen. So how is it that maybe you went about, or what advice would you give more generically about, like, how do you understand the language that's being spoken by the leadership team? Like, where did you start when you were trying to get the lay of the land? Like, was it, well, I'll just leave it as an open-ended question for you. I have ideas about it, but I don't want to predispose you. Yeah.
So it's my job to understand what's happening within the organization. And so the first thing, like at Asana, for instance, I was brought in there to create the community program from scratch. That's wonderful, but one of the challenges with that is community can actually mean a lot of different things within an organization, depending on who you ask. And so one of the first things that I wanted to do was just build broad alignment among leadership. So I called a meeting where I got all of the senior leaders from across the company into one room. And I had them go around the room and say how they define community and what they thought it should be for our company. That was very illustrative, especially for me, but I think for them, they got to hear, wow, there's all these different perspectives on what we think it can be and what it should do and what it should achieve for the business. From there, I was able to ferret out, okay, I've heard all of the perspectives. Here's what I think based on, frankly, reality of, like, here are the resources, here's what we can do, here's the tools at our disposal, and here's the reality of our current customer base. Here's what I think we can do now, and here's what I think we can build towards, and here's what it's going to affect for the business. Once I had that framing, then I shopped it around to those same sets of leaders so that they understood that I heard them, and here was my interpretation of what they want, and here's what's possible, and here's what we'll be delivering. And so that, I think, is frankly just having conversations with people. I found with community builders, like, we get an idea from the person that hired us, and then we go and build the thing. And maybe that's the right way, but often I think it's not, because then you are super siloed into the perspective of one person. You want to take their ideas and their feedback into account, but they may not have full idea of what's possible for the community. They may not understand what the expectations of other leaders or builders at your organization are. And so it doesn't hurt to have these conversations and get the input. The more input you have of the right kind, the better you can create something that will match the needs of the organization.
To extend the earlier metaphor we were playing with, the community as operating system, you could end up with a bad install or a buggy install.
Yeah, you bought the wrong software.
Yeah.
Yeah. It may seem like on the box when you bought it, like, oh, this seems great. Or I read the App Store reviews and this is awesome. But as it turns out, you bought the wrong software because you didn't actually fully understand what you were buying it for.
Yeah, great wisdom in that. I'm sure there are some people that maybe have listened to this and said, "Holy crap! How do I get the executive team in a room with me to have this meeting?" Any advice on that? Because that could be terrifying for someone that's never had to do that before.
It can be, and I mean, even for me, like I'm pretty seasoned. When I did this at Asana, I mean, I was calling a meeting with like 20 people. This is a very expensive meeting. However, it was necessary, and so I think if you are feeling that you're nervous about doing it or you're unsure, I would first identify who's really, really necessary. Whose feedback do you really want to get? So maybe it's not 20 people, maybe it's 5 people, maybe it's 2 people. But I think it's worth understanding that you are there to build a program that bridges the gap between customers and the company. There are very few relationships within a company that are more important than that. And so understand the importance of what it is that you're building and own it. Don't be shy about it, and understand that it takes you being assertive to say like, hey, I want to make sure we're building the right thing for the business and for our customers. I need to make sure that leadership has buy-in for this, and I want to get their opinion on it so that I make sure that I'm delivering what the expectation is. And so just like you would ask community builders like, hey, what do you want, what do you need, you should also be asking the people inside your company. Maybe it's not the C-suite, but maybe it's senior leadership or the leadership of a team or department. You need to make sure that you're asking the right people. Otherwise, how do you know that you're building the right thing? And while it can be nerve-wracking, that doesn't make it any less necessary.
What beautifully said. I mean, I know I've been in situations where I have come in as the strategist and can ask the questions that maybe the people that were in the organization were too hesitant to ask
Yeah.
of a leadership team, and asking the right people is really tricky because sometimes I know there's a nonprofit that I did some work with some years ago where I asked that question of like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to build? Where are you trying to go? And there was a management layer that I worked with that said they wouldn't give an answer because they weren't sure what the actual leadership team thought about it. And they were too hesitant to ask them, what they wanted. So you had to sort of punch through that group to figure out like, okay, what are you really trying to drive here? So you look at the overall mission of the organization, you look at language from annual reports, you try to read the tea leaves as much as you can, make a educated guess, and then hope somebody says, no, we weren't trying to do that. We were trying to do this other thing. And then you can course
Yeah.
correct.
I think if you are nervous about having these conversations, like do all the research that you can, make the educated guess, and then go to the leadership and say, like, based on all of the research I've done, here's what I think. Does this sound right? Am I on the wrong track? Well, what else would you like to see? What's missing? So that at least you're going into the conversation having done your homework. But
Yeah.
don't be afraid to have the conversation. Honestly, like these are just people you work with. Like, get over it. Like if you want to create something that's really useful for your business, you're going to have some conversations sometimes. They're just people. It's fine.
I want that on a t-shirt. Get over it.
Yeah,
That's
honestly,
perfect.
like you're going to have to get brave at some point. Like, yeah, it can be intimidating to talk to the CEO or whatever, but they probably have an opinion on what they want the community to be. And
Yeah.
so you want to ask those questions so that you can deliver.
Yeah. And they're just people at the end of the day, like you said.
Yeah, it's not that big of a deal.
So, man, I can't believe an hour has blown by so fast here. I had two more things I wanted to ask you about, and then I wanted to see if there was anything you wanted to promote before we jump off the call here today. But one is, so the title of the book is The Community Code. In the book, you've got some things where you talk about like code breakers, people like Max Pete and others who've sharing their perspectives or their experiences. The code book and decoded takeaways, with it. What is the code exactly?
Well, it's all of this together. I think all of us together essentially crack the community code by having frameworks. In the book, as you'd mentioned, I have code breakers, which are peers within the space. Like I have my own thoughts, my own experiences, my own opinions, but I'm not the only person, and I haven't built all the communities. And so I invited experts from many different types of communities to offer their feedback into the book on what's landed for them. And so I think together we crack this code of how we integrate community to go to market, how we create value for members and for our organizations, how we make sure our organizations understand it. That's what this is all about. It's like breaking a lock. Like, we have to understand how to do this, and the way we do that is together.
I love that. That's beautiful. And then my other question. This is sort of when I ask many of my guests who come on the show. Is there a current buzzword or term that's in the business community more broadly, or the community world specifically, that you would banish from our lexicon? Is there?
How can I even say this out loud? I don't need to hear the age of AI anymore.
Yeah.
We're in it, folks. We don't need to name it. And all of us are still figuring out how it will impact our programs, what it will mean for our day-to-day work, and how we can serve our members better. I think this is just a fact of how we work now. I don't even think it's frankly even worth naming. It's just part of what we do and how we do it.
Amen. I love that. Well said. So before we sign off here for the day, Josh, if someone wants to learn more about the community code, or they want to learn about Gradual, where would you point them?
Yeah, a few places. First, if you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn. There's not that many Joshua Zerkels around, so very easy to find on LinkedIn. I encourage you to connect with me, message me there. I also write about community at thecommunitycode.com. You can also get my book on Amazon. If you have things that you want to hear, like if you want me to cover a topic, shoot me a message, because I take requests for my Substack. So if there's something you'd like me to cover, let me know. And then finally, if you are interested in building a community program and need a platform, definitely check out gradual.com. You can also join the Gradual community that I lead at community.gradual.com to see it in action.
Wonderful, man. Josh, so great to have you on the show here today. This was an amazing conversation. You're going to have to come back, and we're going to have to just riff on some other topics as well. But again, thank you so much for being on the show. The next show that we have, as I mentioned at the outset, is going to be Chris Catania on June the 26th. That's a Friday at 10 a.m. U.S. Central Time, and he's going to be talking about his book, The Community First Advantage. Community is no longer optional, is the provocative statement we're making. And I know, Josh, you get some feelings about that too. So maybe we can talk about that in the comments, from the show here. If you have not followed the Talk About Your Community show before, we come on about every 2 weeks. You can subscribe to us on the Clocktower Advisors YouTube channel, as well as find us on all the popular podcast outlets, because you can kind of listen to us on the go if you want to hear more of these in-depth, super interesting interviews that I've been blessed to have amazing guests like Josh on over the years. So with that, let's go ahead and land this plane. Please go ahead and connect with Josh, learn more about Gradual, check out his thought leadership on thecommunitycode.com. And in the meantime, please take the weekend, get away from the screen, get out into the fresh air, breathe it in, touch grass, I think the kids say these days. But you can't build great communities unless you're taking care of yourself. And I want you to take care of yourselves. And so thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. And Josh, thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you here too, everybody. Bye.